Hey guys, how's it going? This is Brandon Bias from CheckIt.com, and welcome to another fantastic and legitimate tutorial Tuesday. Yeah, that's right, I said legitimate. You know, kind of mixing things up a little bit. Not saying fantastic every single week. Anyway, so real quick, I want to apologize to our subscribers and all that for missing last week's tutorial Tuesday and all that. I kind of formatted my computer because I thought I had a driver issue of some sort. And so, yeah, I didn't have Photoshop at the time. Kind of hard to make a Photoshop tutorial when you don't have Photoshop. So yeah, hopefully you understand. And here I am this week with another pretty exciting tutorial. And speaking of today's tutorial, this is what we're going to be making. So as you can see, what we got here is pretty sexy. And by pretty sexy, I mean it's awesome. You know you want to make this. I mean, just look at it. Look at it in all of its 3D glory. We've got prisms that are glass-like. They have random refraction craziness going on inside them. We have 3D text. We've got reflections on the ground plane and shadows going into the distance. This thing has it all. Okay, but we're not gonna learn all of this. We're not gonna worry about the 3D text. We're actually just gonna focus on the glassy prism stuff that we got going on over here. So the way I came across this was actually pretty random. I was just messing around with Photoshop one day, trying to figure out 3D features and all that, and this happened. So yeah, kind of an accident, but looks cool, so I figured, hey, what the heck? Let's make a tutorial on it. See what you guys think. Anyway, so I don't even know how long we are into this tutorial, but we should probably get going. Alright, so let's go ahead and make our new document here. I'm going to stick with my normal 1920 by 1080 resolution, and we're going to get a white background going on in here. And just to let you know, when it comes to the 3D aspect of this, it's kind of tough on your computer. So if you don't really have the most, latest and greatest and, most fantastic hardware out there, you're probably going to want to, size it down to 1280 by 720 or maybe even lower, like 720 480. But who would want to do 720p when, 1080p is where it's at, Okay. So we got our new document going. Let's go ahead and double click that background layer and name it BG because it's going to be our background. And I'm going to switch back to my custom workspace for the time being just because, I don't know, we don't want to be on the 3D workspace just yet. So anyway, with that BG layer selected, let's go ahead and add a gradient overlay to it. And let's go ahead and click this gradient to edit it. Now here's what we're going to do. To spice up the background, we want to make it look like it's kind of receding into the distance and so on and so forth. So the way I decided to go about doing this was I clicked this little black slider and I dragged it over to the location of 60%. And then I clicked the white slider to select it and then click again where the black slider used to be to add that white slider, the white slider at 0% there. And then if you go back to the black slider and select it, you see we've got these two diamonds on either side of it. And those basically represent the midpoint between the two sliders. So basically the medium gray is going to be right here between the black and the white slider. But I'm going to go ahead and change that by clicking and dragging that to the left to about 15% on the location. So that way the transition goes from the black to the medium gray a lot quicker and then gradually transitions to that white. And we're going to do kind of the same thing on the other side. So select the black slider again and just click and drag that middle slider to the right until it's at about 60%. And that'll just kind of make it a little bit more gradual down here in the bottom area. Now let's go back to that black slider and double click it. And let's make it a lighter gray somewhere around, let's say right around there, 134 on the RGB for there. All right. So now we got just a nice gradual gradient going on for the background and it looks pretty good. So we'll hit OK through all of this mumbo jumbo and get right into making the prisms. So in order to make the prisms, you're going to have to go to the polygon tool, which is nested along with the rectangle tool. And with that, make sure that your fill is either black or white. I don't know, actually it doesn't really matter. And make sure there's no stroke applied to it. And make sure the sides are set to 3. Oh, and by the way, it'd probably be handy if you were on Photoshop CS6 extended. Otherwise, this is not going to work out for you, alright? So, forgot to mention that, now you know. So anyway, let's go ahead and click and drag somewhere in the lower area of the middle of the document. And we'll click and drag upwards while holding the shift key until the width and the height show at about, let's go with like between 480 and 490 pixels. By the way, if that says something like inches or something like that, In order to change that to pixels, you can go and bring up your rulers by hitting Control R or Command R if you happen to be on a Mac, and then right click on the rulers and choose pixels. And then you can hit Control R to, get rid of those. So yeah, that's how you set that to pixels rather than inches if it's a little bit different for you, and make that little triangle going on in the middle there. Okay, so let's go ahead and rename this polygon to red, because we're going to give this sucker a gradient overlay, and we're going to make it a little red. So, for the first slider, let's just make it a straight up red. And then for the second slider, let's make it more of a orangey kind of a color. And we'll hit OK. And we'll hit OK again. And then we'll change the angle to 0 degrees. Oop, weird sounds going on. So anyway, now we got a nice red to orange gradient going across that little sucker right there. So let's go ahead and duplicate this red triangle by hitting Control J or Command J if you happen to be on a Mac. So that way we've got a nice little duplicate going on here. Now let's go ahead and rename this to blue. And as you can imagine, we're going to make this look blue. So go ahead and bring up the gradient overlay for that, and we'll just change that red to a dark blue. And we'll change that orange to a slightly lighter blue. Pretty straightforward. And then let's go ahead and make our third triangle. We'll go ahead and make this green, and we'll go to the gradient overlay. So let's start off with a pure green for the time being, and then we'll make the second slider a kind of a teal color, so kind of between the green and that cyan color, and it'll make it a nice teal. And also something that you can do if you want to add a little bit more onto this is you can add a slight bevel and emboss to the entire thing. So what I do in this is I change the technique to chisel hard, and then I change the depth to 150%, and then I change the size to about 10 pixels. Now if you want to, you can change the highlight mode to color dodge and amp that up to 100%, just so that's a little bit more intense on that. And then you can mess with the shadow as you want, but I'm just going to turn that off. So I'll go ahead and hit OK, and a mistake that I made is that I did this to the green layer first rather than doing the red layer first. So now the red and the blue are missing out on that bevel and emboss. So rather than going to each of those and trying to remake that effect, I'm just going to hold my Alt key since I'm on a PC. This would be the Option key for you Mac users out there. And I'm going to click and drag that bevel and emboss to the blue and to the red. And so that will actually duplicate that layer style so that it's applied to both of those. So that's a quick little pro tip for you novices out there. Wink, wink. So anyway, with the green layer selected, let's go ahead and go to 3D, new 3D extrusion from selected layer. And of course it says that I can't do anything because it's too complicated. That's because we've got all these layer styles and stuff going on. So to fix that, we're going to select all these layers and then right click and go to rasterize layer style. So now that all of these are flattened, let's go ahead and try this again. 3D, new 3D extrusion from selected layer. There we go. Now it's working. Fantastic, right? Okay, so would you like to switch to 3D workspace? Yeah, sure, why not? It'll probably be helpful. Now, unfortunately, we've only extruded the green one, so we're going to have to go back to the layers panel on the side over here, select the blue layer, and again do the extrusion from selected layer, and then go back and do the same thing for the red layer. Okay, now we've got three 3D objects going on here. We've got the red, blue, and green, but they're all in three different 3D planes. So once again, let's select all three of these layers. So the red, blue, and green are all highlighted now, and we'll merge them together by hitting Control E or Command E for you Mac users out there. So there we go. Now they're all in the same 3D plane. So now we can just rename this from red to prisms. And if we go back to our 3D panel over here, you can see that we've got the red, the blue, and the green groups all for our 3D objects. Now, if you open these up by clicking the little arrow next to it, you'll see that each one of these has the 3D object inside it, and then the 3D object has all of the inflation materials to basically make up the overall 3D effect of the prism and all that. So we don't really need to worry about any of these materials for the time being, so we're going to click this little arrow where it says red to kind of minimize that, but that way we can still see the 3D object within the group. So let's go ahead and do this for the blue layer and the green layer. So now we can actually see the 3D objects for each one of these groups. So once you can see all of these 3D objects, let's go ahead and hold the Control key or Command key if you're on a Mac and select the blue and green layer so that all 3 of them are selected. Now up here in the Properties panel, let's go ahead and change the extrusion depth to 0. That way they're all flat, kind of like shown in the demo before. Okay, so now that all of these are flat and extruded and all that in 3D space, we're ready to start animating these, well, not really animating, but positioning them so that they look a little bit more interesting. So let's go ahead and select the red object right here, just by clicking on it. And if you look closely at these little prongs that you see coming off, they should have 3 little tabs or just parts to them. So we've got the first part, which is a box, which is meant for scaling. We have the second thing, which is a part of a ring, so that way you can rotate it. And then the third thing is an arrow, which is meant for basically just moving the object around. So we want to go ahead and rotate this, but we don't want to rotate it on the Z-axis. We will actually want to rotate it on the Y-axis. So go to the middle part of the red arrow, and then click and drag to the left until the rotation says that it's at -60 degrees. And, oop, overshot it just a little bit. Right there. Voila. So there we go. Now we've got the red triangle rotated to -60 degrees. Now let's go to the blue object over here in the 3D panel, and then we'll rotate it to the +60 degrees. There we go. So there we go. Now we've got all of these rotated in an interesting way, so that way we can see everything that's going on here. Now, real quick, I'm just going to go ahead and select the red object and go to 3D, and we'll do Snap Object to Ground Plane. Because sometimes when you extrude these, it makes it so that they're actually not on the ground plane. So I'll just do that for each one of these objects, just selecting the object and snapping it to the ground plane. And now we know for a fact that they are indeed all on the ground plane. Okay, so before we get into any fancy like material editing stuff, let's go ahead and mess with the lighting and the camera to make the whole scenery a little bit more interesting. So let's go ahead and do the light first. So select the infinite light and click the trash can in the bottom right hand corner to delete it. And then right next to that trash can, there's a little icon you can click to add a new spotlight. So now that we've got this new spotlight, let's go ahead and move it around a little bit. So I'm going to select the third icon in the 3D mode, which is basically the move tool for your 3D options. And I'm going to click and drag upwards while holding the shift key until you basically can't really see the light. And so now we've only got the very tip of this selected, or sorry, not selected, but highlighted from the light. So let's go ahead and point it at the origin by clicking this little icon over here at the bottom of the Properties panel. So there you go. Now the light is aimed directly down at our 3D prisms. Okay, so let's go ahead and change up the camera. Select the current view in the 3D panel, and then go to the first icon, which is the rotate tool in the 3D mode up there. And go ahead and click and drag this around until it's in a position that you think looks pretty interesting. So I'm just going to go ahead and move the camera off to the right by clicking and dragging to the left. And then I'll drag downwards until that 3D horizon that you see over here matches up with the horizon of the background that we made earlier. So I'm just going to put it right about there. Awesome. Okay, so now this is a little bit too far down. So let's grab our move tool and then click and drag upwards. So we're somewhere around there. This is looking pretty good. Now let's grab the fourth tool up here, which is the slide tool. And we'll click and drag downwards to slide this more towards the camera. Alright, so we're starting to look pretty good. Now let's go ahead and move around the prisms a little bit more to make them a little bit more unique and interesting. So let's select the red object and make sure we're on the move tool and all that. And I'm going to slide it on the Z axis so that way it moves backwards a little bit. But now it doesn't look like it's lined up perfectly with the little intersection of the green. So I'm going to very carefully move it on the X-axis to the left until it looks more like it's intersected in the middle. And I'll basically just do the same thing for the blue object. So I'll move that off to the side. And I'll move it on the Z-axis, or X-axis I should say. And so it's looking pretty good. So that's probably not accurate in terms of where it should be and all that, but it looks good from this point of view, so everything should be fine. So now that everything is looking pretty good in terms of positioning and all that, let's go ahead and make these suckers look fancy, shall we? So let's go ahead and open up the red, the blue, and the green 3D objects here in the 3D panel. I'll go ahead and make this a little bit bigger so you can see all the materials a little bit better. Okay, so each one of these objects has a front inflation, a front bevel, extrusion, and back bevel and back inflation material. The first ones we're going to worry about for now are the front inflation material. So select the front inflation material for the red, blue, and green objects. So there we go, red front, blue front, and green front. Pretty easy. Now let's go ahead and size this back down so we can see everything that's going on in the properties panel. Okay, so for all of these front inflation materials, what we're going to do is change the reflection up until about maybe 50%. You can mess with that as you so choose. We're going to turn down the opacity to about 50%. And then we can change the refraction up to maybe about, maybe between 2 and 3. Okay, so now the next thing is to select the back inflation material for the red, blue, and green, kind of like what we did with the front inflation material. But in this case, all we're going to do to the back inflation material is change the opacity down to 25%. Okay, so that should all there is. Sorry, I said that a little poorly. That should be all there is to the glass look of the 3D Prism. So let's go ahead and click the render the 3D scene icon in the right hand side under the properties tab to make sure everything's looking okay. Alright, so I'd say that I've done a long enough render on this, so I'm just going to click somewhere on Photoshop to interrupt it. Then I'll hit Control H or Command H for you Mac users out there to hide all of the 3D objects and stuff that's going on in the background and all that. Okay, so now what you're seeing is basically just a random generation that happens when you set these objects to an extrusion of 0. If you were to even increase the extrusion of these to 1, that entire glassiness that you see with the random like chunks missing and all that, it would go away completely. So this is only happening because the extrusion depth is set to 0. And plus, I think the gradient map, or not the gradient map, but the gradient overlay might have something to do with it. I'm not entirely sure. This is completely random in terms of how it happens and what it looks like when it does happen. Now, if you want to add even more to this, what you can do to add that little pizzazz that I showed in the rest of it over here, you see we've got reflection going on below the entire 3D scene that we got going on here. So in order to do that, it's actually pretty simple, but I will warn you that this takes a lot longer to render out, so fair warning. So we'll go to the environment, and we're going to go ahead and change the reflections opacity to about, let's just go like 60%, just for kicks. And then if you want to make it a little bit fuzzy looking, you can change the roughness up to maybe 20%. So let's just do a quick little demo of how those settings look. Alright, so I'm going to interrupt this real quick because I don't think it got the message that I want more roughness on it, but the entire thing's being a little slow. So 20%, I'll click off of that. And let's try that again just to see if it gets the memo this time with the fuzziness. There we go. So now with the roughness up, you can see that this makes it a lot more fuzzy looking and all that, and it kind of, just adds more to the overall effect. But something that's weird is that this is fuzzy and the shadows are not. So if you want to make the shadows fuzzy, so we'll just interrupt that, we can go to the spotlight and then change up the shadow softness. So you can either just amp that all the way up to 100% or just make it match the fuzziness of the environment. I keep saying fuzziness. I really mean I mean to say roughness. La la la. So yeah. Let's just go ahead and see how that looks with a softness of 20%, just real quick. Okay, so now the softness of the shadow and the softness of the reflection are starting to match each other pretty well. So now if you want to, you can just, hit the render button and just let this go through and then call it good. But for sake of time and all that, I'm just going to leave it as it is and move on to the next part, which adds a lot of depth to the overall look, and that's adding a shadow beneath the prisms. Now, you'd be surprised how much this actually adds to it. I'll go to the original just to kind of demonstrate. So we'll go to layers here. And so take a good look at the prism here and how good it looks like it blends with everything. Now look at what happens when I take away the shadows I added in. Wow. Huge difference there. So without the shadows, with the shadows, it adds a lot of depth to the effect here. Well, not really depth, it just makes it look like it's actually sitting on the plane and adding shadows to it. So if you want to do this, it's actually pretty simple. So let's go to the background layer and make a new layer on top of that. We'll just call this green for the green shadow. And let's go to our brush tool by hitting the letter B. And I'm going to size it up by hitting my right bracket key. And we'll just make sure that the hardness is set to 0%. There we go. So the size of the brush doesn't really matter. We'll just make sure it's nice and big, and we'll click somewhere in the middle to add that black shadow in. So let's go ahead and transform this layer by hitting Control T or Command T if you're on a Mac. And all we're going to do is click and drag one of these points in while holding the Alt key to squish it on down. And let's just make it somewhere around yay big. And we'll click and drag that to the bottom of the prism and position it like so, with a nice little bit of rotation to kind of match the overall look we got going on here. Alright, so I'm just stretching this out because it's fading out a little bit too fast for my liking. So somewhere around there is looking pretty good. And I'll go ahead and hit the little check mark up here to commit that. And I'm going to go to the layer mask, and let's go ahead and mask this off a little bit. By the way, if you happen to be new to Photoshop, I do apologize for not covering this part a little bit. I just don't really have the time because I feel like I've been recording for a while. So anyway, there we go. So now we've got our shadow going on here. Now let's go ahead and make it look a little bit better in terms of color. So let's go ahead and add a color overlay. And we'll go ahead and make it green. And let's turn down the opacity to a point that looks pretty good. So right now I'm thinking in the 16 percentile area is looking good. And we'll turn down the opacity of the overall shadow so that way it blends a little bit better. So there we go, we've got the opacity at about 62%. We're looking pretty good. Now let's go ahead and duplicate that with Control J and transform that with Control T, and we'll rotate this and match it up with the red prism. So let's put that right around there, looking all right. And we'll change that color to red. Maybe mess with the opacity a little bit. All right, looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and mask this off a little bit more. All right. Now let's go ahead and rename this to red. Duplicate it and transform it like before, and we'll give this over to the blue. Blue, yeah. Alright, so I'm going to make this fade out a little bit more with our wonderful masking options over here to help it blend a little bit. And then let's go ahead and rename that blue. And of course, we'll make this a blue color. Maybe not so blue. Alrighty then. So that is the general idea behind making this effect. So I'll just go ahead and, well, let's not do that. I'll go ahead and start rendering this little sucker out. So that way, you know, I have something for you guys to look at the end of the video or something of the sort. So yeah, I hope you guys learned something new. I say that a lot, but it's always true because I put a lot of work into these, and I really hope they're actually being put to good use and all that. So yeah, if you have any questions on this effect, don't hesitate to ask. Just leave a comment in the comment section below. And also, if you like the outcome of this effect, just like the video, show some support, show it to some friends, something of the sort. Just let us know that you love us and all that fun stuff. So yeah, that's all I've got for you guys today. I'm going to go play some Minecraft. See you guys next week.